Tonight, deadline day. President Biden defending his withdrawal from America's longest war. The new images, the Taliban, inside the Kabul airport after the final U.S. troops left Afghanistan, inspecting U.S. aircraft. The president addressing the nation today, calling the withdrawal an extraordinary success, despite the deaths of U.S. troops, saying he had to choose between leaving or escalating.
I was not going to extend this forever war.
The president saying up to 200 Americans remain there, breaking his promise to get them all out. And that image seen around the world, the last American soldier to leave Afghanistan. Tonight, what we've learned about him. Also, the rising toll from Hurricane Ida, a deadly highway collapse, the race for rescues, and growing desperation. More than 1 million still without power in that dangerous heat. Ida still on the move. More than 70 million under flood alerts, all the way to Boston. The wildfire emergency near Lake Tahoe, tens of thousands ordered to evacuate. Florida making good on the governor's threat to punish schools over mask mandates. Plus, our NBC News exclusive, the dangerous rise in lasers aimed at passenger planes. And it just debuted at #1 inside our NBC News podcast, Race and Education colliding in one Texas town.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. I'm Tom Yamas in for Lester. Tonight, America's longest war officially over. This image marking the end, showing the last soldier to leave Afghanistan, Major General Chris Donahue of the Army's 82nd Airborne Division. Hours later, the Taliban walked across that same runway in Kabul, inspecting U.S. military equipment, all left behind by the U.S. President Biden speaking to the American people on this historic day, facing fierce criticism for withdrawing, despite up to 200 Americans still trapped there. All of it just days after 13 American service members and hundreds of Afghan civilians died in an attack outside the Kabul airport. The president tonight with a new warning to ISIS-K, quote, "We are not done with you yet." We'll start our coverage at the White House tonight with Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander.
With the Taliban tonight declaring victory in Afghanistan, President Biden at the White House marked the end of America's longest war.
Leaving August the 31st is not due to an arbitrary deadline. It was designed to save American lives.
Facing bipartisan backlash, the president at times angry and defensive, standing by his decision to end the mission with up to 200 American citizens still stranded.
90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out.
But that move breaks this promise President Biden made less than 2 weeks ago.
If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
The last soldier out, Major General Chris Donahue, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, seen here boarding the final C-17 cargo plane Monday at Kabul's airport. The president touting the safe evacuation of more than 124,000 people as a, quote, extraordinary success.
The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats.
While insisting, despite the frantic final days and the loss of 13 U.S. service members, there was no way to carry out America's exit without chaos.
There is no evacuation from the end of a war that you can run without the kinds of complexities, challenges, and threats we faced. None.
But Republicans are accusing the president of betraying Americans.
When you surrender like this, you don't leave your people behind, man. And we did. And I'm afraid they're going to kill these people and hurt them the entire time they're dying.
And 2 days after the U.S. says it foiled another ISIS-K attack on the airport, President Biden delivering this stern warning.
To ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
Peter joins us now from the White House. Peter, the president also spoke about how he's still committing to bringing those Americans home.
Yeah, Tom, that's right. President Biden says the Taliban has made public commitments to allow them to leave and that the U.S. has economic leverage. But without American soldiers there, critics say that's relying on a diplomatic effort with an American enemy. Tom?
It's the big unknown tonight. All right, Peter, thank you. The Taliban quickly declared victory after the last American troops left, celebrating as they took over the Kabul airport. Here's Richard Engel.
Today was Victory Day for the Taliban entering the airport. Their fighters inspecting the spoils the U.S. left behind at what was the last American toehold in Afghanistan. The Taliban spokesman saying today the group wants new relations with the West and are even open to foreign investment. They looked over the aircraft and weapons U.S. troops abandoned and decommissioned so they can't be used. But American forces did not damage the airport itself. The United States is relying on the airport to reopen quickly to evacuate American citizens and translators who never made it out in the airlift. Some of them now in hiding from the Taliban, and who one day, once they have documents, will have to pass through here to leave. The Taliban insisting they'll let them go. The Taliban also promising to fight ISIS and never allow Afghanistan to be a sanctuary for terrorism. But will they? In the remote host province, the Taliban held another victory rally, parading mock NATO coffins. A speaker praised the ISIS suicide bomber who killed 13 U.S. service members and 200 Afghans, saying the Taliban have now established the Islamic State the suicide bomber yearned for. Taliban leaders promised to both fight ISIS and incorporate them into their ranks, hoping ISIS will become more moderate under the Taliban's influence. Tom?
Richard Engel for us tonight. Richard, thank you. We want to move on now to our other major headline, the rising toll from Hurricane Ida. More than 1 million customers in Louisiana still without power in the scorching heat, and the remnants of Ida still on the move. 71 million under flood alerts from Georgia all the way to Boston. Our Miguel Almaguer is in Marrero, Louisiana tonight. And Miguel, the rescue efforts have been harder today because of that weather.
Tom, just a short time ago, we had lightning in this area. Rescue teams had to pull out of the water. Now they're back in. But adding insult to injury, there's a flash flooding effect in this area, and many people are still trapped in their homes.
Tonight, the race to rescue is still unfolding in Louisiana. The beaten and battered, stranded for days, plucked from homes where the water is rising and hope was fading.
We got rescued by a truck just now.
Pregnant and desperate, Heather Wiebe finally escaped the floodwaters.
Our house is underwater. We would have drowned.
Facing a complex maze of submerged roads, buckled highways, and alligator-infested waters which likely claimed one life, search teams still can't reach the hardest-hit communities.
In just this one area of Jefferson Parish, not far outside of New Orleans, they had about 135 rescues in roughly a day. They've never seen water quite like this before, and if you want to go further, you'll need a boat.
Tonight, the easiest ways into areas like Grand Isle and Lafitte is through the air. Their only roads quickly turn to rivers. What happened in minutes could leave the stranded trapped for days.
It was unbelievable. 4 feet of water just came rushing in.
With the scope of destruction coming into focus, what's out of view is also devastating. Surrounded by water, more than 500,000 have none from their taps safe to drink. Lines for gas and supplies are leaving locals in searing heat. For some, the storm's aftermath more devastating than the impact.
This is probably the worst I've been through. I went through Katrina.
Though torrential rain has passed, in Mississippi, the deluge helped erode a highway. The collapse killing 2 and injuring 10. Tonight across this battered region, no break from the heartbreak. The storm gone, but the crisis still unfolding. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News, Marrero, Louisiana.
I'm Morgan Chesky in New Orleans, where tonight it's a slow-motion disaster, leaving more than 1 million people in the dark.
Do you have any idea when you'll get power back?
Right now, no.
How's that feel?
They have crazy.
Ida crippling a massive power grid. Today, the energy provider's saying it could take 3 weeks before hard-hit areas are back up.
The schools are not open, the businesses are not open, the hospitals are slammed. There's not water in your home, and there's not going to be electricity.
In St. Charles Parish, just west of New Orleans, officials now warning residents to prepare for more than a month.
These are all empty?
For Clyde Jackson, fuel for his generator more precious than water.
I'm on diesel now, and I can't get diesel. So, once that goes, it goes.
What then?
That's it.
Many hospitals, including New Orleans Ochsner Health, are still relying on generators. But as Ida struck, neurosurgeons Dr. Roger Smith and Joseph Lockwood faced a patient emergency.
We brought him into the operating room. It involved taking a piece of the skull right off temporarily.
In the middle of a hurricane?
In the middle of the hurricane.
The lights kind of flickered right before we were starting. I was scrubbing in, and then the lights went out, and Dr. Smith looked at me and said, well, I guess we'll do the whole thing under candlelight.
The lights came back on just in time. Tonight, thousands of line crews racing against time, fighting brutal heat and Ida's aftermath to bring one disaster to a close.
And tonight, the governor says more than 25,000 linemen from 22 states have converged on Louisiana. But even with all that help, the main energy provider says while some could see power back on in 48 hours, there is no definite timetable on when that grid will be fully online. Tom?
Morgan Chesky for us tonight. Morgan, thank you. In the West, another disaster is unfolding. The explosive Caldor fire, forcing tens of thousands to evacuate from the popular Lake Tahoe resort area. Steve Patterson is there.
Tonight, a field of ravenous flames swirling at the doorstep of thousands, laying siege to South Lake Tahoe, forcing a state of emergency. Overnight, through choking smoke, firefighters push back, working around the clock to protect homes in neighboring communities. But the sun rose over the Caldor fire's ever-expanding plume, destroying another 5,000 acres overnight, now threatening more than 30,000 homes with more than 50,000 residents under mandatory evacuation. Monday's mass exodus causing gridlock as thousands of evacuees clogged the highways.
When you evacuate, you realize how many things you left behind.
At nearly 200,000 acres, the erratic Caldor fire is now the country's highest priority as powerful winds spread the eastern front over bone-dry brush.
What we're experiencing is not normal. I hope it's not the new normal.
Red flag warnings are in place through Wednesday, with heavy winds and high temperatures in the forecast. And South Lake Tahoe, famous for its slow-paced charm, bustling casinos, and scenic beauty, now abandoned.
Heading into Labor Day weekend, this town should be packed with tourists. Instead, it is eerily quiet, save now for the wind, which is just starting to pick up at a critical time during this firefight. Tom?
Steve, thank you. In just 60 seconds, the battle over masks in schools escalating to a new level as child COVID infections surge. Welcome back. A COVID vaccine for children under 12 is still months away. And tonight, in states like Florida, kids are caught in the middle of a battle over masks in schools. Here's Kristen Dahlgren.
Tonight, 11-year-old Peyton Lee is fighting COVID in a Florida hospital.
It's my worst nightmare.
The fifth grader with Down syndrome wore a mask in school, but it's not required, and many didn't.
There's people out there, children out there like my daughter, who have special needs and make them even more vulnerable. And that's what people should be thinking about, keeping everyone safe.
This week, the Florida Department of Education withheld funds from 2 school districts that made masks mandatory in classrooms, while the Federal Department of Education has now opened an investigation into 5 states for not allowing school mask mandates, claiming it violates the rights of children with underlying conditions. This week, the Children's Hospital Association had a warning. There may not be sufficient bed capacity or expert staff to care for children. Almost a quarter of all COVID cases reported last week were children.
They are sicker, it's more contagious, and it's a much more virulent strain.
3-year-old Aurora Cannon spent days in the ICU struggling to breathe. Her mom, an emergency room nurse, is vaccinated, but worries she brought it home from unvaccinated patients.
It's really hard seeing what I've seen for the past 18 months and then watching my daughter go through it.
Aurora's been released from the hospital. But tonight, many children, like Peyton, continue to fight. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
Our thanks to Kristen. Now to an NBC News exclusive. With laser attacks on aircrafts on the rise, we look at the FAA's warning about the alarming trend posing a risk to both pilots and passengers. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
Flagler, we're getting hit by that laser again.
It happens every day. Cockpits lit up by handheld lasers.
Who's been hitting us with a green laser?
In Florida, a man in a boat first admitted pointing a laser at a sheriff's department chopper, thinking it was a drone.
I did it.
But is now pleading not guilty.
When the laser hits, that beam is big enough to envelop this entire cockpit.
Sheriff's Department Chief Pilot Brian Smith says he's been hit many times at low altitude when he's most vulnerable.
You can get laser burns that are in your eye. Those laser burns hurt. Feels like somebody punched you in the side of the face or poked you in the eye.
It happened to United Airlines Captain Jonathan Sawyer on approach into Miami with passengers on board.
I turned to look to see what it was, and it was in fact a green laser.
that then illuminated the entire flight deck.
Fortunately, the first officer was able to land safely. Surprisingly, even with lower air traffic last year, the FAA reports nearly 7,000 laser attacks in 2020, the most since 2016, and even more this year. Most often on Friday and Saturday nights. California, Texas, and Florida report the most cases. The suspects very often young men who may not realize the danger to pilots and passengers.
Well, it doesn't really matter what the motivation is. It's got to stop. And you certainly don't want pilots to be distracted while they're flying the airplane.
Pointing a laser at an aircraft can lead to criminal charges and an $11,000 fine. The FAA is now stepping up enforcement, already issuing $120,000 in fines just this year. Tom,
thank you for that. Coming up, the NBC News podcast that just climbed to #1 inside the explosive battle over race in one Texas suburb. Back now with the NBC News podcast that shot to #1 on the Apple charts. It's a deep look inside a story we've been reporting on about a Texas school district where parents are in a battle over diversity and inclusion efforts. Tonight, Antonia Hilton takes us to Southlake in our Kids Under Pressure series.
Roshni Chowdhury is anxious as she gets her 12-year-old Mahika ready for the first day of school.
Got it?
Not only about COVID, but about the school's culture after such a divisive year. They live in Southlake, Texas, one of the first suburbs caught in a national fight over diversity and history. After videos surfaced of students using the N-word, conservative voters delivered a landslide victory this spring to school board and city candidates opposed to a diversity plan.
As a minority family here in Southlake, do you think that Carroll schools are a safe environment?
I think it is a safe environment. We feel safe here. But I would say that I am preparing my child to deal with these issues when they creep up, because we're not immune from it.
From Virginia to Missouri, communities have been fighting over alleged teaching of critical race theory.
And just because I do not want critical race theory taught to my children in school does not mean that I'm a racist.
It's a decades-old academic study of the legacy of racism and inequality in society. There's no evidence it's been taught in public schools, but dozens of state leaders have tried to ban it anyway. And conservatives have turned the phrase into a catch-all for any lessons that might make white students feel guilty. Dr. Lane Ledbetter, the superintendent of Southlake's Carroll Schools, gave us an exclusive first-time interview. A lawsuit and restraining order block him from working on any kind of diversity and inclusion plan for the kids.
Is there racism in Southlake and in Carroll ISD?
So let me think about that question. I'm going to stop there. I think it goes back to people understanding each other, almost from an empathy standpoint, just being able to understand varying perspectives and differences.
At some point, are you going to be forced as a leader to pick a side, to pick a yes or no?
I don't know that I necessarily have to have a yes or no to that question. For me, I am focused on my priority. My priority is the students.
Bye. Have a great first day. Bye.
At times, Roshni and Vikas have wondered if it was a mistake to raise their daughter here.
Trust is important in every aspect of life, and it just feels like in Southlake, neighbors have lost trust of each other.
For now, the Chowdhury family will continue to educate their daughter on American history and diversity at home. Antonia Hilton, NBC News, Southlake, Texas.
And we want to mention the first 2 episodes of Southlake are available now wherever you get your podcasts. When we come back, inspiring America, so many across the country, helping those in the storm zone. Stay with us. Back now with Inspiring America. Tonight, good people from all over the country helping neighbors in need in the storm zone. They say it takes the worst to bring out the best. Hurricane Ida may have been strong, but a surge of generosity is proving stronger. Americans springing into action to assist storm-ravaged areas.
We have several hundred pallets of MREs. We have hundreds of pallets of water, disaster boxes.
At the Houston Food Bank, scores of volunteers have been collecting donations. In Grand Prairie, Texas, trucks with enough supplies to help more than 2,000 families are on the move. Pet essentials are being dropped off at the North Shore Animal League in New York.
We lived through Hurricane Sandy 10 years ago, 9 years ago, so we know the feeling.
In Baton Rouge,
Red Cross volunteers taking care of the storm's smallest survivors, and in hard-hit New Orleans.
There's a lot of people who obviously need to eat. And
at Betty's Bar and Bistro, Tommy Acosta had a freezer full of food that was about to go bad. So today, he cooked for the entire neighborhood.
I've told people my whole life that if we're not here to help each other, why are we here?
The best of New Orleans right there. That's Nightly News for this Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Yamas in for Lester Holt. For all of us here at NBC News, good night.